The wind clawed at her coat as Abigail Tedesco swung her legs over the edge of the hospital rooftop, London's lights blurring 24s below. One slip, one breath too deep, and 3 years of being called cursed would finally end. Her hands gripped the cold concrete until her knuckles burned white. Then the door behind her creaked open. A man stepped out, tall, dark coat flapping, coffee cup still in his hand like he'd simply wandered up for air. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He lowered himself to the ground a few feet away, back against the wall, and set his coffee down with a quiet click. "It's cold tonight," he said, voice steady. Abigail stared at the drop. Her heart hammered so hard she felt it in her teeth. She had come here to disappear. Instead, a Korean doctor sat beside her in the dark and refused to let her go. Chapter 1. Everything that came after. Abigail Tedesco stood in her narrow East London kitchen and slammed the iron down on the wrinkled blouse. The appliance hissed, went dead, then sputtered back to life on the third try. Steam rose in weak curls. She dragged it across the fabric until the sleeve lay flat, then checked the clock. 20 minutes until the interview. A single sheet of paper lay on the table beside the half-empty jar of Berber spice. Another rejection. The letters blurred when she glanced at them, so she looked away and folded the blouse with sharp, deliberate movements. Her fingers trembled only once. In the bathroom, she wiped condensation off the mirror with her sleeve and stared at her reflection. High cheekbones carved from her mother's face. A jaw set like her father's. She searched for the girl who once danced at weddings in Addis Ababa, hips swaying without shame, laughter spilling loud enough to fill rooms. The girl who roasted coffee beans on holidays and memorized every neighbor's order. That girl had vanished somewhere in the last 3 years. Abigail blinked hard, turned off the light, and grabbed her bag. She walked to the interview through streets still damp from last night's rain. The office smelled of instant coffee and printer ink. A woman with tight lips asked questions Abigail answered by rote. 20 minutes later, the woman shook her head with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "We'll be in touch." Abigail already knew what that meant. She stepped back onto the pavement and let the cold air sting her cheeks. 3 years ago, almost to the month, her parents had driven down from Leeds to collect her from university halls. A Sunday afternoon in November. Wet roads. A lorry that lost control. Her mother's favorite scarf had still been in the car when the police called. Abigail had stood at the curb outside her halls, phone pressed to her ear, while the world folded in on itself. After the funeral, Auntie Grace flew in from Addis Ababa. She never bought a return ticket. She moved into the spare room of a cousin's house and took over the role of guardian with the same fierce energy she once used to run her small shop back home. For 6 months they lived in uneasy quiet. Then one night, after Abigail had burned dinner for the 3rd time that week, Grace's exhaustion cracked open. "I don't know what follows you, Abigail," Grace had shouted, hands clenched at her sides. "But trouble has chased you since the day you were born." The words had landed like stones in deep water. Grace had apologized the next morning, eyes red, voice small. But apologies couldn't pull something like that back out once it had sunk in. Abigail moved out 2 weeks later. The new flat was small and smelled of damp. She found a job at a cafe that closed 6 months after she started. Then a retail position that ended when the shop relocated to cheaper premises. Freelance gigs dried up one by one. Her boyfriend of 2 years lasted longer than most things. 8 months ago he had packed his clothes while she sat on the edge of the bed and watched. He spoke gently, which somehow made it worse. "Nothing ever goes right when you're around," he had said, zipping the suitcase. "I can't keep waiting for it to change." He hadn't used the word cursed. He hadn't needed to. Abigail climbed the stairs to her flat now and unlocked the door. The Berber jar sat on the shelf like an accusation. Low, almost gone. Her mother would have refilled it weeks ago. She set her keys down and moved to the kitchen table. The rejection letter still waited there. She turned her phone face down so its screen wouldn't light up with more nothing. For a long time she simply sat. The radiator clanked. Outside a bus hissed past. She studied the photograph on the wall, her parents smiling on their last trip back to Addis. arms around each other, sunlight catching in her mother's braids. Abigail pressed her palms flat against the tabletop until the wood warmed under her skin. She searched for one reason, any reason, that this small life added up to something worth continuing. Her chest tightened. The air in the flat felt too thick. She stood up, grabbed her coat and keys and stepped back into the night. The streets blurred as she walked. 4 blocks later, St. Mercy Hospital rose ahead of her, its windows glowing against the dark. She had passed it hundreds of times. Tonight her feet carried her through a side entrance she had never noticed before. She climbed stairs that smelled of disinfectant and old paint. A heavy door at the top opened with a push. Cold wind rushed over her face. She crossed the flat gray rooftop and sat on the low wall at the edge. Her legs dangled over 20 floors of nothing. London stretched below. Red buses, streetlights, millions of lives moving forward while hers had stalled. The wind tugged at her coat. She gripped the concrete until her knuckles ached. This was where everything had led. 3 years of people saying the same thing in different words. Too unlucky. Too broken. Too much. She had finally believed them. Behind her, the door creaked open. Chapter 2, The Rooftop and the Doctor. Behind her, the door creaked open. Abigail froze, legs still dangling over the edge. Wind whipped across the rooftop and tugged at her coat. She kept her gaze fixed on the blur of London lights 20 floors below. Footsteps approached, slow and measured. Then they stopped. A man lowered himself to the ground a few feet away. His back met the low wall with a soft rustle of fabric. He set a paper coffee cup beside him. The plastic lid clicked against concrete. "It's cold tonight," he said. His voice carried low and even, like he was commenting on the weather to an old friend. Abigail's fingers dug harder into the rough edge of the wall. Her knuckles burned. She said nothing. The city hummed far beneath her. Car horns, distant sirens, Liv's "Are You Big" forward. He didn't move closer. He didn't pull out a phone. He simply sat, knees drawn up slightly, coat collar turned against the wind. Minutes passed. The cold seeped through her jeans and numbed her thighs. "I come up here sometimes," he continued after a while. "Between shifts. The air feels different. Cleaner maybe." Still she stayed silent. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she tasted metal at the back of her throat. One shift of her weight, one strong gust, and it would all end. No more rejection letters. No more empty Berber jars. No more voices telling her she carried trouble wherever she went. "You don't have to talk," he said. "I'm just going to sit here for a bit." His presence pressed against the edge of her awareness. Not demanding. Not hovering. Just there. She risked a glance sideways. He stared straight ahead at the skyline, profile sharp under the security lights. Dark hair. Broad shoulders under a wool coat worn over hospital scrubs. Steam still rose faintly from his coffee cup. The silence stretched longer this time. Her shoulders began to ache from the tension. The wind stung her eyes. "Everyone says I have bad luck," she whispered at last. The words scraped out of her. He turned his head only slightly, eyes still on the city lights. "What do you think?" He swallowed. Her throat felt raw. "I think I'm tired of waiting to find out if they're right." His fingers flexed once around his knee. "How long have you been tired?" Abigail looked at him properly then. He kept his gaze forward, giving her space. Something in that small choice loosened the knot in her chest. 3 years. That's a long time to carry something. "It gets heavier," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her lips together and tasted salt. He nodded slowly. The movement was small, but she caught it. A pause stretched between them again, comfortable enough that she didn't feel the need to fill it immediately. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She waited. "What were you like before the 3 years?" The question hit her sideways. No one had asked that. Not Auntie Grace. Not Kofi. Not the ex-boyfriend who left. Everyone saw only the version that came after the accident. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. "I danced at weddings like nobody was watching." The memory pulled the words out before she could stop them. Hips moving, arms up, laughing so loud the aunties would pretend to scold me. I cooked injera for the whole building on holidays. My hands would be covered in teff flour and I'd still be smiling. I remembered everyone's coffee order. How much sugar, how strong, whether they wanted it with cardamom. My dad said I laughed like I owned the room. My mother called me fitsome. Complete. She stopped. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard and looked down at her hands gripping the concrete. One fingernail had cracked. She's sitting on a rooftop in the cold, he said quietly, voice certain. She didn't go anywhere. She's just very tired. Tears spilled over then. They tracked hot down her cheeks and cooled instantly in the wind. Her chest heaved once, twice. She pressed one hand flat against her sternum like she could hold everything inside. The man stood slowly. He walked over without sudden movements and stopped beside her on the wall. He extended his right hand, palm up. Not grabbing. Not reaching to pull. Just offering. I'm Wujay, he said. Be Wujay. I'm a doctor here at St. Mercy. And I would very much like it if you came inside with me. Abigail stared at his open palm. Warm skin against the night air. Lines etched from years of taking care of patients. She looked at the drop below, then back at his hand. Why? The word came out hoarse. Why does it matter to you? He kept his hand steady. His jaw tightened for a moment before he spoke. Because I lost a patient tonight. A young man. We did everything right. Every protocol, every second counted, and it still wasn't enough. I needed air before I could go back downstairs. He exhaled slowly. And because I'm not willing to lose someone else when I'm standing right here. His eyes met hers now. Steady. No clinical distance. Just raw honesty. And because the woman you described, the one who danced at weddings and remembered coffee orders, sounds like exactly the kind the world cannot afford to lose. Her breath caught hard in her throat. The wind seemed to quiet. She lifted her cold fingers and placed them in his palm. His hand closed around hers, warm and firm. Abigail, she said. Abigail, he repeated. Her name in his mouth sounded solid, like something he planned to hold on to. Let's go inside. He helped her swing her legs back over the wall. Her knees shook when her feet touched the concrete. Wujay kept his grip supportive but not tight as they crossed the rooftop. He pushed the door open and guided her down the stairs. Inside the hospital corridor, bright lights made her squint. Voices and footsteps echoed. A nurse spotted them and hurried over with a blanket. Wujay wrapped it around Abigail's shoulders himself, tucking the edges carefully. Within minutes, Kofi burst through the main doors. His face looked gray, eyes wide with a mix of terror and crushing relief. He crossed the waiting area in long strides and pulled her into a hug that squeezed the air from her lungs. I got the call, he said against her hair. His voice shook. I thought, God, Abigail, I thought this time. She hugged him back. His familiar Ghanaian British accent grounded her. The same friend who had sat through exams with her, who had danced badly at weddings beside her years ago. Auntie Grace arrived 40 minutes later. She swept into the room like a force of nature, coat flapping, eyes red-rimmed. She crossed straight to Abigail without pausing and wrapped her arms around her niece. Strong hands pressed against Abigail's back. The scent of frankincense and familiar perfume filled her nose. Grace held her tight and whispered into her hair, first in rapid Amharic, then in English. You are not bad luck. You are my sister's daughter. You are the best thing she left behind. I am so sorry it took me this long to say it properly. Abigail's shoulders trembled. She buried her face in her aunt's shoulder and let the words sink in. Through the small rectangular window in the door, Wujay stood in the corridor. His face looked open in a way that suggested it didn't often. His eyes softened as he watched the reunion. He lingered a moment longer, then turned to walk away. Before he disappeared around the corner, he glanced back. Abigail lifted her head and met his gaze through the glass. He gave one small nod. Deliberate. Certain. The nod of a man who had every intention of returning. Chapter 3: What Comes After the After. 6 weeks later, Abigail Tedeschi woke to pale morning light slipping through her curtains. She lay still for a moment, hands resting on her stomach. The heavy press that used to greet her before she even opened her eyes had lifted. Not gone completely, but lighter. She pressed her palms flat against her chest and breathed in deep. The air moved easier. Counseling sessions had started the week after the rooftop. The first few left her drained, words scraped raw from places she had kept buried. She would walk home with red eyes and sit at her kitchen table staring at nothing. But after the fourth session, the edges softened. Medication took 3 full weeks to settle in her system. Mornings grew steadier. She noticed small changes first. How her hands stopped shaking when she poured water, how she could finish a sentence without her voice cracking. She started painting again. Brushes and colors she had packed away years earlier came out of a box under her bed. Kofi arrived twice a week with plastic containers of jollof rice or wache still warm. He sat at the far end of her table, elbows on wood, watching her work without filling the quiet. His presence felt like steady ground. Auntie Grace called every single day. Most conversations stayed light. Questions about food, about sleep, about whether Abigail had remembered her jacket. On one Thursday evening, Abigail stirred berbera into lentils and told her mother's favorite joke, the one about the lazy donkey who outsmarted the lion. Grace's laugh burst through the phone, deep, rolling, exactly like her mother's. Abigail froze with the wooden spoon in her hand. The silence that followed carried warmth instead of ache. She thought about Wu Jie constantly. She remembered the exact weight of his hand, palm up and waiting. The way he had said she hadn't disappeared, only grown tired. The small nod through the glass door that promised he would return. At night she wrote him a long letter on thin blue paper, pouring out the accident, the words that had cut deep, the rooftop, and how his steady voice had cut through the dark. In the morning she folded it neatly and slipped it into a drawer. She never sent it. On a Wednesday afternoon, exactly 6 weeks after that cold night, Abigail pushed through the hospital's main doors. Her coat felt too warm inside the heated lobby. She approached the reception desk, fingers twisting the strap of her bag. "Excuse me. Is Dr. Bai Wu Jie working today?" The receptionist checked her screen and nodded. Abigail took a seat in the waiting area. Plastic chairs squeaked under her. She waited 40 minutes, counting tiles on the floor, then counting again. Her knee bounced until she forced it still. Double doors swung open. Wu Jie stepped through in blue scrubs, stethoscope draped around his neck. He stopped mid-stride when his eyes landed on her. His eyebrows rose. His shoulders straightened. Abigail stood. Her hands smoothed down her coat. "I wrote you a letter," she said. "I didn't send it, but I wanted to tell you what it said." His mouth curved at one corner, the same rare half-smile she had seen once before. "I have a break in 20 minutes. Can you wait?" "I've already waited 40, she answered, voice steadier than she expected. 20 more is fine." He gave a short nod and disappeared back through the doors. Exactly 20 minutes later he returned, jacket now over his scrubs. He led her to the hospital cafeteria. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He bought 2 coffees and carried them to a corner table. Steam curled up between them. Abigail wrapped her fingers around the cup and began to speak. She told him about the wet November road, the phone call, Auntie Grace's words that had lodged inside her chest. She described the empty Berber jar, the boyfriend who left, the rooftop, and how close she had come. She spoke about his hand extended, his quiet certainty, and how those minutes had shifted something heavy inside her. Her voice stayed even, but her free hand pressed flat against the table edge. Wu Jie listened. He didn't interrupt. His fingers stayed wrapped around his own cup, eyes fixed on her face. When she finished, he leaned forward slightly. His jaw shifted. "I came up to that roof because I lost a patient that night," he said. "Young man. We followed every step correctly and it still wasn't enough. I needed air. I almost walked to the car park instead. Almost drove straight home." He paused, thumb brushing the side of his cup. "Something made me go up those stairs. Abigail met his gaze across the mediocre coffee. I'm glad you did. So am I, he replied. Every single day. He set his cup down. Can I see you again? Not as a doctor. I recused myself that night. I'd like to know you as myself. She breathed in slowly. I have bad days. Probably more coming. I work in emergency medicine, he said, shoulders relaxed. Bad days don't scare me. I'm still learning how to stop believing what people said about me. Then we figure it out. He said it simply, like the next logical step. Their first real meeting outside the hospital happened 3 days later. Woo-jae took her to a small Korean restaurant in New Malden. Warm lights glowed over wooden tables. Abigail ordered dishes whose names she couldn't pronounce, pointing at the menu with a determined finger. He explained each one patiently, how the kimchi fermented, why the bulgogi sizzled that way. His voice low and focused, hands gesturing neatly. She watched his mouth move as he spoke and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Later she invited him to her flat and prepared Ethiopian coffee. She roasted beans in a small pan, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. 3 small cups, cardamom, no sugar. She poured the ceremony exactly as her mother had taught her. Woo-jae drank all 3 without hesitation. He set the final empty cup down and looked at her. This is the best coffee I've had in London. He smiled, cheeks warming. You might be biased. He didn't deny it. 3 weeks into their quiet rhythm, Kofi met him on a Sunday afternoon. They shook hands in her kitchen. Kofi held on a second longer than necessary, eyes assessing. After Woo-jae left, Kofi turned to her, arms crossed. He doesn't look at you like you're a problem to be managed. Abigail's shoulders dropped with relief. No. He doesn't. One evening she walked into Woo-jae's kitchen wearing one of his oversized sweaters while he was on his weekly video call with his younger sister. The sister's face filled the screen. Surprise shifted to delight in a single heartbeat. He said something quick in Korean. Woo-jae's jaw tightened, then he answered back, voice warm. When the call ended, Abigail leaned against the counter. What did she say? He picked up his coffee, eyes crinkling slightly. She said I look different. Boss. I told her she's very observant. Abigail studied his face. Do you look different? He held her gaze for a long moment. His brow furrowed, chin lifting. Yes. I think I do. On a Saturday morning 6 weeks into whatever this was, neither of them had named it yet. Abigail sat at her kitchen table with paints spread around her. Woo-jae read a medical journal at the opposite end, coffee already made exactly how she liked it. He had done it without asking, learning her preferences through quiet observation. She set her brush down and studied the canvas. Bright colors. Strong sure lines. The best painting she had finished in years. She knew it in her bones. My mother used to say everything happens for a reason, she said. I stopped believing that after the accident. Woo-jae looked up from his journal. He closed it slowly. Do you believe it now? Abigail glanced at the painting, then at the coffee between them, then at the man who had chosen the rooftop instead of the car park. The full jar of Berber stood on the shelf behind him. Her parents' photograph hung on the wall, smiling down. I don't know about everything, she said. But some things do. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His thumb brushed her knuckles once. Some things, he agreed. The photograph of her parents still watched from the wall. Grief still arrived on certain mornings, sharp and sudden. She still attended counseling. Some days she had to search for the woman her mother had called Fitsum. But the search grew easier. The Berber jar stayed full. Laughter returned, first in small bursts, then louder, filling her small flat again. She painted. She cooked injera on weekends. She danced in her kitchen when music played, hips moving without shame. Woo-jae sat with her through the hard mornings. He never tried to fix her. He simply stayed. Abigail was not fixed. She still carried the weight of loss. But she carried it differently now, lighter, shared. She was healing, brushstroke by brushstroke, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, quiet moment by quiet moment. And she was no longer doing it alone. The world had told her women like her didn't get happily ever afters. Wu Jie had simply refused to agree. He had sat down beside her in the dark and chosen, every day since, to tell a different story. That was love, not loud rescue but steady refusal to let the old narrative win. Abigail looked across the table at him now, sunlight catching in his hair, and smiled. The woman who once danced at weddings was finding her way back. And this time, someone steady walked beside her. I hope Abigail's story reminded you that you are not too broken, not too much, and not too unlucky for love. Sometimes someone just needs to sit beside you in the dark and refuse to let the old story win. I have missed you all so much. V. Afrosoul Love has been away for a little while, but I am back. Truly back. And I have been writing and preparing so many more stories for you. Beautiful ones. Emotional ones. The kind that stay with you. And for those of you who have been asking for the spicier side of Afrosoul romance, the stories that run a little too hot and intimate for this platform, I have sorted something out just for you. The link is in the comments and the description. Go find it. You're welcome. Please like, share, and subscribe if you are new here. And leave me a comment. I genuinely read every single one. V. Afrosoul Love is home, and I cannot wait to share what is coming next.